Welcome, everybody. This is our last scheduled meeting for the winter speaker series for the working group here. And we're fortunate today to have Aaron Putnam with us, and we'll hear from him in just a moment. Our plan for today is to hear from Aaron during the first half of the hour, and then to have a discussion during the second half. During which I'm hoping we can revisit some of the topics that we discussed way back when this group was just sort of an idea, and we were trying to define some directions and some other possibilities for making this group a more formal entity. So I look forward to coming back to that, but first I'm looking forward to Aaron's talk. He's going to be talking about glacial chronologies from the Wind Rivers and the Sierra Nevada. And Aaron is coming to us today from the School of Earth and Climate Sciences at the University of Maine, and is fresh off some field work. Correct, Aaron?
That's right. That's right. Just came back from the Southern Hemisphere not too long ago.
Well, thank you for being with us. Why don't you go ahead and share your screen when you're ready, and you can take it away.
Will do. Okay, can everyone see that? Is the screen sharing?
Looks good.
Good, great. Okay, well, thank you, Ben. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's wonderful to come and see everyone here and share some of our information with you. As Ben said, I returned from some field work in New Zealand, where I was for the past month or so, and so I have to apologize that I wasn't able to make it to the recent talks, but I do look forward. I do intend to view the recordings, and I'm looking forward to that. So anyway, but thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. So as Ben said, what I thought this might be a useful opportunity to share with you some of the mapping and chronologies we've undertaken over the past decade or so on landforms constructed during the last glaciation in two key spots in the western United States, in the Wind River Range and in the Sierra Nevada. I'll focus mostly on results from the Wind River Range today. I will show one bit of chronology from the Sierra, but just for the interest of time, I thought I'd focus on the Wind River Range, and also that's where we've been putting more emphasis in recent years. So the photograph that you see here was taken at the end of the day in a place called Boulder Lake, which is a beautiful lake, a trough that was revealed when a large outlet glacier of the Wind River ice cap receded and left behind the trough. And in the foreground, you can see a moraine with some boulders, and then a whole flight of left lateral moraines going up towards the sky. And this is the left lateral moraine sequence of the Boulder Canyon system in the Wind River Range. And as you can see, there's just many of these landscapes just are rich with geomorphological evidence for past glacier fluctuations, and are perfect for mapping and very well suited towards exposure dating. And so I'll show you some information from this particular area, and as well as several others. But first, I thought I'd begin, because I'm fresh, well, not quite fresh off the plane, but it still feels like I'm fresh off the plane from New Zealand. I wanted to start with a puzzle that we were wrestling with in New Zealand, and because I believe it relates to what our interest in the Western United States as well, and perhaps those of this group. But so I show here a picture of Lake Pukaki in the Southern Alps of New Zealand, with Aoraki Mount Cook's featured in the background. Much like many of the lakes in the Western United States, this lake exists because of the deglaciation, the termination of the last ice age. And in the foreground are two prominent belts of terminal moraines with outwash plains graded to them. And we've dated these moraines with several beryllium 10 exposure ages. And what we found was that the outer belt of moraines that you can see down in the lower part of the image correspond to a time construction at around 20,000 years ago. And then there's an outwash plain that divides this moraine belt. And there's another moraine belt that is the set of moraines that impounds the lake and are the last moraines that were constructed prior to the big recession that occurred to allow this lake to form. That moraine belt was 18,000 years old, according to our exposure ages. Now, what happens when you go from this part of the sequence up towards the left lateral side is there's an interesting geomorphological set of features. So the next image is an image taken via helicopter early in the morning of the upper left lateral moraines of Pukaki. And what happens is those two the outer moraine belt that dated to 20,000 years ago then splays apart into at least 6 or 7 different moraine belts. And these moraines, they were formed intermittently over the course of over 20,000 years, with the oldest moraine belt forming around 44,000 years ago, moraine belt inboard of that 42,000 years ago, 36,000 years ago, 32,000 years ago, moraines at 28,000 years ago, 23,000 years ago, and 20,000 years ago, and then 18,000 years ago. Of course, that's the last moraine standing before the big termination. And so if we had just, the point I wanted to make, if we had just focused on the terminal area, we would have missed all of this rich paleoglacier information that's stored on the landscape. And there are some analogous situations in the Western United States too. And so I'd like to share some of that with you. Okay, so I'll turn our attention to the other side of the planet now, to the Western United States, as shown in the center of this image. But I did want to say that the broader motivation for working here is to develop chronologies that can help fit within a global framework, with the motivation of trying to establish glacier chronologies all around the planet that can help aid our understanding of the mechanisms behind glaciation, millennial scale climate change, and the termination. And so our initial interest in going to the Western US and the Wind River Range in particular was the fact that it was located at a latitude 44 degrees north. It was on the same latitude, but in the opposite hemisphere as where we were working at 44 degrees south. So we could develop an apples to apples a comparison between mountain glacier chronologies. But this is we've also been working several other places. Right now, our broader group has a team down in Cordillera Darwin in southern South America. We've just prior to the pandemic, we finished our final field season of a 5-year program in the mountain chains of Asia, where we worked in the Mongolian Altai and the Tian Shan, Western China, and in the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayas. And so this is a part of that broader framework that we've been putting together. Okay, so I'll show you, most of the work I'll show you today is from the Wind River Range, which is up in the upper right-hand corner of this image. But I'll also show you one chronology from the Sierra Nevada as well. And the reason being is that those two mountain ranges straddled the Great Basin, and those mountain glaciers would reflect the climate of the Great Basin during the last glacial period, which, as you all know, also featured the intermittent rises of lakes particularly during the termination, during the last deglaciation, but perhaps earlier as well, such that the Nevada would have been a lake district. And so my hope is that some of these chronologies can help place those paleoclimate, could help provide some additional information into what drove those climate changes. Okay, so this is a map of the Wind River Range, and what I'll show you first are 3 chronologies that I've had for a while, and I just for the purpose of this talk decided dig in and update and make some new diagrams for you as of today, really. But those chronologies come from the classic Fremont Lake sequence and the neighboring Half Moon Lake, as well as the New Fork Lakes moraine set just a bit to the north. And then after that, I'll show you some works that we've just started, where my students have developed projects and are starting to develop some data. So we'll give you a preview into that as well. So first, I'll start with Fremont Lake, which is of course the type locality for the Pinedale glaciation in the Rocky Mountains. A spectacular set of glacial landforms that you can see in this image here. And what I'd like to draw your attention to is the beautiful sets of moraines that loop around the terminus, the terminal moraines that are the classic Pinedale moraines with a more subdued Bull Lake moraines just out beyond them. And then there are several, there are multiple belts of moraines as well. And I'll show you a map of this in a moment, one of which impounds the lake. And there are these moraines that form peninsulas diving into the lake. And there's a similar set of moraines right in the nearby Half Moon Lake system over to the left, on the left side of the image, the right side of the image. And apologies. And that moraine set also features several looping moraine belts that we targeted for exposure dating and glacial geomorphic mapping. And so this is a glacial geomorphic map of that sequence here of the classic Pinedale moraines at Fremont and of Half Moon. And I should note that this is also where John Goss produced one of the early chronologies in the mid-90s for trying to date the Pinedale glaciation. And he was kind enough to provide me with his notes when we went into the field. This is back in 2008, 2009. So this is a while ago. But I'll describe the image. This is a geomorphic map. The dark red units correspond to moraine ridges with the ground moraine being mapped in that lighter pink color. And the Bull Lake moraines, the penultimate corresponding to the penultimate glaciation, are mapped in dark green. And I've plotted the exposure ages and presented in years before, thousands of years before present in these boxes. And what I'll do is I'll zoom around the image a bit to highlight a few salient sets of data. So first, I'll take you to the terminal area of the Fremont Lake sequence. And as you can see, there's several ages in the terminal moraines, this terminal moraine belt that date to about 21 or 22,000 years ago. And that moraine belt can be traced continuously to the Half Moon system, where there are several ages that are about basically the same. And so at that point, the glaciers had converged, and the moraine can be traced more or less continuously around the system. And then inboard of that moraine, there's another prominent belt that is the belt that impounds the lake of Fremont. And that moraine dates to, gives ages of upper 18s, 19,000 years old or thereabouts. And there's a similar corresponding moraine in the Half Moon sequence as well, to which a prominent outwash plain is graded in the middle of the sequence, also affording ages of about 19,000 years ago or so. And I'll summarize these in a second in another way, but I just want to show you the geomorphology and how the dates sit within the moraine set. Okay, and then inside, inboard of those particular moraines is one more belt of moraines. And this can be seen as a set of, I'll start here with Half Moon Lake, a prominent moraine. It actually doesn't look prominent on this map. It is a beautiful moraine. It loops up and over some bedrock and then continues around these lakes here, Half Moon Lake. And that dates to about 17,800 years ago or so. I'll show that date in a second. Several dates in the upper 17s and lower 18s. And similarly, Fremont Lake has a corresponding moraine belt that dates to about 17,700 years ago or so, right there, that forms these peninsulas going into the lake. And so the three sets of moraines, but there's something else I should note. And I'm going to zoom back to just go back to this original map. And this is something I just ignored for a long time, but particularly up along the right lateral margin of this moraine set, it's a large moraine, and it's complex. There are a number of interleaving ridges that this map doesn't even really do justice to, and within that set, there are several ages that are about 22,000 years old, but then there are ages of that. There's an age of about 73,000, ages in almost 27,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. I always disregarded those as perhaps recycled rocks with maybe some prior exposure, but they are on the outermost moraine, and it's certainly a composite ridge. And so I'd like to leave open the possibility that those ages could be telling us about some earlier fluctuations that were just barely preserved. And so to keep those dates in mind as we move forward. On this other side, there's an age of 37,000 years ago, for example. So those started popping out to me a bit more recently as we gathered more data. And maybe I think I will show you, I hope I can convince you as to why. Okay, so that's the Fremont Lake sequence and the Half Moon sequence. Okay, going up the mountain range is the New Fork Lake sequence, and the outer moraine belt here has two interesting sets of ages. It's the outer Pinedale. There's a cluster of ages here that date to about 28,000 years ago on the left lateral margin, and then several ages that date to about 24,000 years ago on that outer margin. And just maybe keep that 28,000 year number in mind. And then inner moraine belts date to about 18 or 19,000 years ago, and about 17,000 or so. This inner moraine, there's a cluster of ages that are incongruous with the rest of the ages on the moraine, and that I puzzled over that. But if you go to the moraine that splits the two lakes, they're the more coherent data set down there of about a little over 17,000 years old or so. Okay, so what I did today, I was trying to think about the best way to show this, but I decided just to compile all of these data sets into one plot and show you the sequence in a statistical manner. So these are all camel plots, normal kernel intensity diagrams that depict episodes of moraine construction from these three moraine sets. And just to avoid making the figure too complicated, because many of the moraines are the same in both places, I just put the Half Moon and Fremont Lake data for the younger part of the sequence. But I should note that New Fork Lake also fits right in there as well. But in general, what we see is moraine construction perhaps as early as about 28,500 years ago, with moraines then being constructed at 24,000 years ago, 22,000 years ago, 19,000 years ago, and the last real prominent moraine around 17.7 thousand years ago. And so that's the chronology from those particular sequences. Now, I'd like to turn your attention to some places that we've started working in more recently. And this is the area that from which I took that photograph in the very first slide. This is the Boulder Lake moraine set. And what attracted us to the Boulder Lake moraine sequence is that it's just rich with well-preserved and moraine ridges that become separated towards the terminal area. I'll show you an example. So I should note that this is going to be a feature of our PhD student, Xander Roman's thesis. And so he's been undertaking a lot of the work that you'll see here. And he collected a huge set of samples that he hopes to develop a chronology from. But I just want to show you some recent, this is a new advance as well. There's beautiful LiDAR data available that is really assisted with a geomorphic mapping. But this is where the left lateral moraines sweep in and splay apart and become terminal moraines. And you can see just how beautifully preserved this sequence is, with a set of more subdued Bull Lake moraines projecting out from beneath those Pinedale ridges. Just another example of the geomorphology. And this is a work in progress, but this is a map that Xander's putting together, highlighting these features. And he has some preliminary data. I didn't mention this before, but we also have data on the Bull Lake moraines. And in general, they come out around somewhere, well, they're different populations, but between 140 and 160,000 years old. And Xander has some ages within that range as well. But what I'd like to turn your attention to are these early preliminary ages that Xander's gotten from the upper part of the Pinedale moraine, and that begins to split apart into multiple ridges. And he's found on the outermost segment of this moraine complex, he's found an age as old as 36,000 years ago, with several ages of about 23 or 22,000 years ago or so, and also an age of about 26,000 years. So there's definitely there are some older ages in there, and they are on the outer part of the moraine belt. So we really don't have any stratigraphic reason to assume that there's anything wrong with them. Okay, and then finally, I'd like to show you some work just south of Boulder Lake from this place called Soda Lake. And this is the subject of Lauren Wood's master's thesis, and she's developed a nice chronology and map of this. But again, here's some of the LiDAR imagery of the area with beautifully preserved terminal moraines. This would have been almost a distributary tongue of the Boulder Lake, the Boulder Canyon glacier. This is Lauren, and this is her maps and dates. And she took a similar approach. And I'll zoom in on this set of left lateral moraines that Lauren dated. And this is where the sequence, again, a complex of tightly packed ridges. And what's interesting is on the outer part of the Pinedale ridges, Lauren's found a grouping of ages of about 30,000 years old. And just inboard of that are ages of about 27,000 years old, and then 23,000 years old. And then on the other side of the sequence, which is much more tightly packed, it's almost one big composite moraine ridge, she finds a very similar set of populations with ages of about 30,000 years and 23,000 years, 20,000 years. So and then these boxes with no dates in them, those are samples that the final samples Lauren hopes to run as part of her thesis. So these are the plots from that data set. And as you can see, there's one really old age that we decided not to rule out of 43,500 years old, but there's a population of ages of around 30,000 years or so, 27,000, 28,000 years old, 23,000, 21,000, and about 20,000 in that sequence. And so Lauren plotted this up, and I apologize. I would like to merge this with the other data I showed you. I just haven't had time. But there's the distribution of dates that she's found from these moraine belts. And as you can see, there's some similarities to the other moraine sets, but she's also found more evidence for dates of around 27 or 28,000 years ago. A prominent moraine of about 31,000 years old, and even hints of potentially older advances sticking out from these composite moraine ridges. Okay, so now I'll just quickly, very briefly jump to the Sierra Nevada, just to show you one example of a moraine belt we dated at the classic beautiful Convict Lake moraine sets. That's just a little ways south of Mono Lake on the eastern flank of the Sierra. This is a photograph of the Convict Lake moraine sequence. And you can see there's several prominently well-preserved terminal moraine ridges here. And this is shown here is a geomorphic map of that moraine set. And the one major point I want to make here, and I'll briefly step through the chronology, is that the timing of the constructions of these moraine ridges is very similar to the dates from the Wind River Range. In the outermost fragment of a moraine that we dated, we found ages as old as potentially 36,000 years old, 30,000 years old, and two ages of around 28,000 years. And then the next prominent belt of moraines dates to around 24,000 years, and then just in board of that, dates of about 22 or 23,000 years old. And then 21,000, 18,000, 19,000, and then the innermost moraine with one anomalously old date, it gives an age of around 17,700 or so. And so, as you can see, very familiar chronology from what came out of the Wind River Range. Okay, finally, I want to bring it back to make just one more point here, in that these moraine sets, they preserve beautiful millennial scale fluctuations of these glacier margins. And one interesting observation is that if we just plot these up against our chronology from Southern Alps of New Zealand, and I'm just showing Lauren's work from Soda Lake here. I haven't even had time to add our data from Fremont and elsewhere. An interesting thing that arises is that for every moraine belt we've dated in the Southern Alps, there seems to be a corresponding moraine belt dated in the Wind River Range in Sierra Nevada. And so it just hints at the possibility that we might be looking at simultaneous episodes of moraine construction, and hence simultaneous glacier fluctuations on the millennial scale between the hemispheres during the latter part of the last glaciation. Okay, well, I think I'll leave it there, but I'll just leave you with that point. And also, I wanted to note that a lot of these maps that you see are works in progress, but for the interest of the database, the Paleoglacier database that you've discussed, we'd be more than happy to contribute these geomorphic maps and the shape files, if that would be of any help for that effort. And of course, trying to get these chronologies published so those data can all be shared as well. But with that, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. That was really great to see. We do have some time for questions if anyone wants to raise their hand or jump in. Leif, go ahead.
Thanks for the talk. Yeah, really, really beautiful work. I was wondering, I'm intrigued by the sort of the variability of ages when you are transitioning sort of from a lateral moraine into like the proper terminal moraine. And I was wondering about sort of processes of actual transport of the boulders between the lateral versus the terminal. And it sort of, I think it gets at some of the ways you can interpret the ages. But yeah, have you thought about that a little bit? What type of terminal moraines they are? I don't know if you can speak to that.
Well, no, it's a good point. It's a good point. And my initial interpretation of some of the older dates was that they were potentially recycled, perhaps being picked up. Yeah, like you said, maybe retransported along the lateral margins, and that could be true, especially some of those more errant dates. But I think what convinced me that maybe there might be more to it is that it's also it was that we're also seeing some patterns there too, and starting to see it show up in other places and with better formed moraines. So there could be some preservation of earlier moraine construction in there as well. But perhaps up along the lateral margins is where you might expect more preservation in that regard too, and moraines being spared subsequent destruction by subsequent advances that might not be so lucky down in the terminal area. So, but no, that's a good question.
Yeah, just to follow up, I mean, my understanding of a lateral moraine is that the rocks need to ride on the surface of the glacier and then fall off the edge.
Oh, I
But
see what you mean.
yeah, and then I don't know about a terminal moraine can be formed by a lot of different ways. Like you can push material forward, right? The rocks can ride on the surface of the glacier, but I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So
Well, oh no. Well, actually, in that regard, sorry, I misinterpreted your question somewhat. So I would speculate, an educated speculation, that a lot of these rocks were probably transported, melted out of the ablation zone and dumped onto the moraines. And that I say that because it's particularly in the terminal area, because there are some of these beautiful cuts through the moraines, and you can see into the core of them. And usually particularly those moraines near the margins of the lakes, they're constructed as follows. It'll be a big set of contorted lake sediments, paleo lake sediments, with very few, maybe some small drop stones, but mostly it looked even potentially varved in some cases. But you see big contorted lake sediments with a thin drape of till on top, and big boulders that are projecting above the surface of the moraine. You can see they were dropped into this kind of wet material because they've deformed the sediments underneath them. So there's some beautiful sections in the moraines there that would suggest that a lot of the boulders were, dumped on top of a moraine that was formed from thrust lake sediments. It's kind of interesting. I mean, maybe not in every case, but in a number of these cases.
Joe, go ahead.
Hey, Aaron, thanks for that talk. That was awesome. They're beautiful data sets. And it's really, I haven't seen those in a while, so it was great to stare at them again for a little bit. And it's this, you probably know this, but there's some really striking similarities between the ages that you're getting in the Wind Rivers and the ones we have in the Tetons. And particularly those occasional flyers that you get that are in the 40s. We see the same thing in the Tetons. Our old outliers tend to be they're not that many, but they're in stage 3. And I see Glenn Thackeray is on the line here. Glenn and I have had many discussions about those ages, and contemplating some of the same things that you were saying, where maybe this is actually not just random inheritance, but the signal of, some boulders that may be a vestige of some earlier advance, and yet we don't really see the moraines associated with them very clearly. So question though is, how much have you done with comparing your Wind River data to, essentially a lot of the other data sets across the West, and looking for alignment that you see between the sort of the spectral peaks, if you will, in your ages and other chronologies?
Oh, I think that, yeah, I mean, with these new dates, that's something that we're actively doing. And Lauren Woods, for example, is, she's undertaken a big effort to make that comparison. But in general, I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think there's good agreement. I was thinking of Ben's recent review paper, and particularly on the young end, it all seems to fit quite well with other sequences in the, you name it, the Uintas, and maybe in the Colorado Rockies, and the Tetons, and elsewhere. So I think that's my view of it at the moment. And of course, we're trying to start teasing out the earlier dates, and we've certainly looked at some of Glenn Thackeray's work, and those of others with some hints of perhaps some MIS, some marine isotope stage 3 advances.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. There's a lot of commonalities, but there seems to be some age clusters in the Wind River data set that don't really appear in some of the other chronologies, as I'm aware of. Some of the older ones, like the upper 20s, that you seem to have appearing here and there. That's really interesting. I wonder what those mean, but they seem to be there.
Yeah, yeah, that's relatively new. You know, those ages have popped up recently, so I agree. Yeah.
If I could chime in real quick, if my mute, I'm not muted, am I? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure. I'm on a different setup this week, so I wasn't quite too sure. Though the original dates that John Gossi got at Fremont Lake sort of mimics that, from the outer moraines to the inner moraines in the terminal area there, if I recall. Didn't they go from about 23 to about 19 or 18, something like that, as I recall? So we saw the vestiges of this pattern. Your data set is just incredible. Those is just a wonderful way to look at those things. Two points as well too. I'm trying to think how to do this. The old ages, the 46, 44s, 48s, and then the 28s to 24. Those have been showing up out west, and you really nail it in the Wind Rivers. They have been showing up here in the Midwest as well too, in Iowa. The Des Moines lobe, a few years ago, they discovered a deposit directly under the Des Moines lobe, almost a direct footprint, which is why they didn't know it was there before. And it dated in two sequences, one between 46 and 44, and the next one between 28 and 24. So it's like, we've got these stage 3 ages popping up in all kinds of interesting places as well. One more point I wanted to make, interest in the sense of the ridges of the terminal and the lateral moraines, relating to, the ice pullback, and as it always does. We see that also on the other side, but we see that in the sequences of recessional moraines up the valleys. So rather than a moraine ridge like at Fremont or Soda or Boulder Lake being 40 yards away, and the dates are 2,000 years difference, what we see is 1.5 kilometers up the canyon. It go from the terminal at around 22, 23, up canyon about 1.5 kilometers, you see 19.5, and then another kilometer up the canyon, you see 18.7, something like that. So I'm wondering if the same sequence isn't mirrored on the other side when the ice is coming down those narrow canyons in that way. So we've got an east-west geomorphic variability there, if I'm saying that right. Anybody see any any use in that comparison?
No, that's a really interesting observation, and the geometry of the Wind River Range themselves on the west side, it was more of an ice cap with and then the canyons on the east side. So that would be really interesting.
Yeah, the ice came out of the Alpine in the west side and then seems to have merged together on that high level erosion surface, or in that mid-level, I should say, erosion surface. And then after it coalesced, then it shows its way down those different canyons. Yeah. So there's a bit of a difference in terms of response and response time, possibly, between the east side, where all of the major glaciers are feeding almost directly down the valleys, and the west side, where it's sort of a coalescing, almost an ice cap, an ice sheet, letting the ice go down those, allowing the ice to sort of spread out down those valleys that way. It's really interesting. I'd like to think if we do enough ages out there, like you're doing, we could actually tease that out a little bit and figure out, did the ice advance slower or faster on the west side versus the east side because of that geomorphic difference in where the ice was accumulating? No answer there.
Yeah, that sounds.
The questions are the fun part. The questions are the fun part. And then the field work that tries to answer those questions. That's the fun part.
All right, well, let's thank Aaron again for that great talk. Beautiful mapping and beautiful data sets, Aaron. That's so cool to see. So let's see, we have we have people here, and we have about 20 minutes or so left in the hour. As I mentioned before, what we're hoping to do with our last meeting in the scheduled series anyway, is revisit some of these topics about where we might go from here as a working group. So I'm going to share my screen if I can do this in the right order. So hopefully people can see my slideshow here, my 2-slide slideshow. And what Joe and Leif and I have done is just put together some of these conversation points that we had going back when we were just considering how to form a working group. And while we're still an informal group here, we would like to keep the conversations going, keep the discussions going, and potentially arrange some future meetings and some future work efforts that could help us get to some of the goals we've identified early on here. So what I'm hoping that we can do is start a discussion here about what we view as these most important goals, maybe get some primary goals set in place here, talk about some future directions that we could take to meet those goals. If we need another meeting, which I think would be a good idea, do we want to set up another schedule of Zoom meetings, or do we want to try to do something in person? Some of the products that we've looked at so far, we've learned a lot about chronology, and a lot of that chronology is available in the ICE-D that Joe Tulenko presented to the working group a few weeks ago, and he presented a way to view that in a GIS environment. We have a prototype now of a Paleoglaciers database that we can also view in that way, and we're trying to come up with ways to represent that database in a way that will be useful for everybody, and also put forth some effort to updating that database. And we have a couple of questions that I think are worth discussing here. And then Leif, maybe you could speak to the idea about potentially bringing people together to write a paper about drawing paleoglacier outlines.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, one thing that I think is exciting just very generally about the combination of what we're doing, like a lot of what we do, like what Aaron talked about today, is developing the chronology. A big piece is also creating the glacier outlines, and then doing the modeling. And I think from my view, the actual outlines themselves maybe are a little bit, they receive less attention. And Ben and Joe and I have been poking around looking for papers that actually outline potential, like a standard for how to make paleoglacier outlines. And it's a contentious topic, but we're thinking that there could be a nice contribution that could come out of our working group that would bring us together and sort of put together our thoughts on what it takes to make a good, strong paleoglacier outline. And those outlines, of course, can be used for all sorts of things, modeling, using these great ELA estimation tools, estimating, the effect of glaciers on landscapes with sort of GIS analyses. There's lots of applications, but what I'm interested in working on is a paper that would bring really anyone who's interested in contributing together. And what are some of the elements? One thing would be to create sort of a decision tree for how you find where a paleoglacier was present, and then ultimately build your outline. And it's something that a lot of us are teaching our students, but I don't know that there's a formalized statement of methodology for how you could do that. What else could be included in this paper? Case studies. Joe presented last week a nice case study of, whether or not, how you can tell whether an ice cap is present in the Steens Mountains in Oregon. We could have case studies in a potential paper related to the effect of differences of rock types. Where you're in a shale or sedimentary dominated environment, you tend to have a different expression of glaciers in the landscape than, for example, the more crystalline rocks that we see in the winds. I mean, even in the winds, there's also sedimentary rocks that affect the morphology of moraines and how we might draw an outline. So in addition to that, I'm interested in the processes of deposition of moraines, how, the specific type of moraine we see, how does that affect maybe where we draw our outline. So there's a lot of pieces we could tie into a paper like this, and it would be wonderful to draw from everyone's experience here to create a nice collaborative contribution that would be valuable for people working in the Western US, but also globally. So my vision is just to send out an email to the group, and anyone who's interested, we can then organize around that. And in that, I can share, in that email, I can share a potential outline for the paper. But any thoughts on that, questions, I'm happy to answer any now. But if you're really interested, please just reach out over email. And I was muted the whole time. No.
Leif, I unfortunately missed last week's talk on doing the Paleoglacier outlines, but it's something I've been doing this week, and I've been drawing them in like Google Earth. I'll explore some of the canyons we've mapped, the lower portions on foot, but we haven't been in the upper reaches of a lot of these ranges. This is in Western Montana that I'm talking about. And I do see what I think is evidence for an ice cap. There's a lot of coals that are pretty smoothed over, and there's no beautiful horns or anything. It's a lot of the mountains, although they're tall and rugged, they're it's like, well, where did this end? Where did the ice end in this upper canyon? And so I guess my thought was, with these paleoglacier outlines, we probably have to decide what timestamp we want to be drawing them for, whether it's the 22K or 20 or 18 or LGM max. So, because I was struggling with, I'm going to draw it as late Pinedale, right? Like I was like, okay, well, what was it like at 18,000 when I have like my best ages and most clear sense of where it was? But that's not necessarily how far the ice covered and extended. You know what I mean? So it's like depends on that timestamp of how we want to. Do we want to draw multiple glacier outlines, and how to handle those ice caps is a really good question. I have no idea.
It's a great point. I'm going to let Joe take this one because he's the expert on that topic.
No, I'm not.
I'm just going to throw you under the bus.
So Spruce, we talked about this last week as one of the challenge. I mean, you bring up a lot of really good points and a lot of really tough decisions that need to be made. But, getting back to sort of the ice cap thing, the point I made with the Steens was that I had a student that was basically working with Google Earth and making outlines and doing the best he could using entirely remotely sensed, imagery, right? Without the benefit of field work. And he came up with some really nice looking outlines, but then I directed him to some work that Ken Beavis did for his PhD involving field work and some pretty unambiguous evidence for striations and grooves and such that you just aren't going to see, in any of the Google Earth imagery or even the LiDAR or anything like that. So point being that it's without the benefit of field work, it could be that a lot of outlines out there are missing ice that's in the accumulation zones that could even be, ice caps or coalesced glacier heads. So I think that's something that, Leif was talking about decision trees and how that might that might be in there somewhere as a decision, like, is there ambiguity about what might have been up there in the past in terms of ice caps or not. But the other question you bring up, I mean, I was thinking about Aaron's talk, and the maps, the beautiful maps that he just showed. There are just so many different positions that outlines could be referenced to in a place where there's that much attenuation that you see amongst the ridges in the terminal and lateral zones. So I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, but I think it gets back to what the purpose of those outlines is intended to be. If you're looking for a potential modeling target that's specific to the LGM, then, well, the outer termini and laterals would be your targets. But if you're more interested in transient modeling of deglaciation, then you'd probably want a series of outlines. So in terms of the Paleoglacier inventory, I think that we would have to have some more discussion about what the general interest of the community would be in terms of what would we want to be making available to the community and for what purpose. So that's not really an answer to any of your questions, but just some thoughts that we've definitely talked about, me and Leif and Ben, in thinking about this Paleoglacier inventory. And I'd be really interested to hear more thoughts about this from other people in the group here.
One thing I'll mention here, just because we are getting close to the end of the hour and I've got far too many bullet points on the slide here that we could possibly cover in a short amount of time. I will ask the question, can we plan to do another Zoom that would be just a discussion-based meeting about some of these items here and maybe some others that will come up in the meantime? We proposed April 13th. That seems to be in between most of the spring GSA meetings and some other events that we've been trying to work around. How does this look for people in general? Few thumbs up. Okay. All right. So I'll get that on the calendar, and I'll send some reminders about that, and maybe we can put together an agenda that has more that people are anxious to discuss. And a handful of other things. I know that since we've been meeting on Thursdays and Fridays, we've done that to try to allow as many people to join. If they can't be there every Friday, maybe they can be there on Thursday, and vice versa. We do have recordings. I don't know if people have taken a look at those. I think some people are watching them on YouTube, but that's where they're posted. And the website for the working group has direct links to those, as do the email messages that I send out. So if you're looking for anything that you might have missed, please take a look at those. The videos are separated by week. The recordings are separated by week, so you can pick and choose which ones you'd like to watch. As far as the database goes, we were discussing that last week. Received input from a handful of folks, and we've found some new sources, and we've had some discussions about developing attributes for these Paleoglacier outlines. And I think the development of glaciers at different extents, whether it's the LGM or whether it's something earlier than that or something later than that, if we get to that point where we're trying to reconstruct at least the glacier outlines through time, we can certainly build attributes around that. And we've been having conversations too about trying to get more attributes that better follow the Randolph Glacier inventory. And so Philip has already put together a toolbox for developing some of those attributes, which is fantastic. I'm really looking forward to trying that. But one of the things we really want to be able to do is have some opportunity for people to not just pull from the database, but also push data towards it. And that's something that I can certainly work on in the next month or so, and try and make this more available to people. But if there's anything that you want to share about how you would work with the database, that's something that we would still love to hear from the group. So please feel free to share your thoughts on that. And any other ideas while we're all here for a few more minutes.
I mean, Ben, I think I don't think that I don't know if this is true, but at least as far as I understand, nowhere is there like a place where there are outlines like with, in the way, especially that Philip has talked about them with, dividing them by drainage area / with an ID. So it's a first time thing that's never really been done. And the Randolph Glacier Inventory is for all modern glaciers, and it's updated, I don't know, every 5 years or something, and it's used extensively. And so, working on outlines in the Western US, I think we have a lot of effort that's already been put in, and there's great outlines already. But what Ben has in this is really is a powerful new thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just want to add that this inventory definitely is very important. I think we can build a paleo one comparable to the RGI inventory. I think they should have a pretty popular application. Yeah, I personally look forward to be part of this. Mm-hmm.
Very good. I'm glad to hear that. All right, so we will put that next Zoom on the schedule for April 13th. I hope that's a date that sounds good to everyone here. And maybe just a time to organize more of our thoughts and ideas going forward. That may end up being the last meeting that we have prior to the summer. And one thing that was mentioned earlier in our discussions about the group is just sharing research plans. Having a working group, one of the advantages is to avoid duplicating efforts, right? So we've certainly found ways to work together a little bit more through sharing what we're working on. I think just talking about what's coming up for us too is important. So maybe we can plan to do that. I may call people out individually to just give a quick, what are they called? Lightning talk or something like that when we have our next conversation. And I'm sure we'll have some other discussions going in the meantime too. So yeah, anything else you want to share, please reach out to me or reach out to the group. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention if anybody is going to Rocky Mountain GSA, that might provide an opportunity for at least a subset of us to meet.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Keith. That's in late May. I should know the dates of that meeting.
Yeah, I should too, but
I don't, but it's in late May. Claire Todd has also been promoting a session at the Cordilleran GSA meeting in Reno that's earlier. That one also takes place in May. So we may have an opportunity to get people together at whatever section meeting they're planning to attend. Eric, go ahead. You're muted, Eric.
May 23rd through 25th is the Rocky Mountain GSA in Fort Collins.
Okay, very good.
talking about the glacier outlines real quick, before we all dump out of here, and I've got, and is Philip still in the group? Phil, you still there?
Yes.
I was just wondering, since we've got quite a few of the outlines done for the Wind Rivers, we're kind of checking ourselves right now in terms of, we used Google Earth at first. I was pretty confident of what I was looking at, because, you know, when you've been there for 35 years, you kind of remember what was there. But I was wondering, Philip, should we share some of those outlines with the group so they can see, you know, kind of what we've been doing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many to share, but the classic ones we could, you know, Bull Lake and Fremont Lake and that complex there like that, just so you guys can see kind of what we've come up with. Although I'm assuming other ones in the group have been doing their own too, but we did it on Google Earth and with KML files. And as far as I know, unless he disagrees with me, Philip, those have been working out pretty well for you, haven't they? The KML files.
Yeah, a lot of modeling, a lot of need to
Yeah,
adjust.
well, yeah.
So basic idea is using, you know, Dennis, you know, draw the, you know, end marine and then some trim lines, and then I run the paleo ice, you know, model, kind of reconstruct the boundary and thickness.
Yeah.
It's a good experience, you know, a lot to learn to how to practice, you know, how to do that. But I think we have some interesting results. Yeah.
Yeah, taking away the ice from large glaciers like Fremont Glacier and those is, I think Phil has really had his hands full trying to figure that out. Although we have gotten some data on ice depth from some coring up there that they did 30 years ago. But yeah, we'll do that. I'll check with Phil and see which ones he likes best in terms of what represents our work, and we can send it out to the group and to see what everybody thinks, whether or not we know what we're doing or not.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question, is the degree to which we should depend on modeling for developing the outlines.
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that.
I'm just talking about the digitized outlines that I give to Phil so then he models from which he models and then extends the ice on up into the high country, because, you know, there's not much to go. Trim lines in granitic terrain are just the worst to try to find.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, are you dealing with in the sense of the winds, are you dealing with Pinedale, or are you looking at something that developed during Bull Lake and Pinedale just fit itself in there? You know, so that's been the big problem of mine, trying to figure out if a trim line actually exists to send to Phil. Quite often I've drawn one and then decided I'm not happy. I'm not secure with that one. I'll just let the model take care of how much the ice filled the upper cirques.
I just want to add one point. I think my experience so far is need to be, you know, back for several times, right? So maybe model can predict a boundary, but not happy, and then we can, you know, modify that boundary and then remodel again.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not one-time deal. There's
been a couple of places where Phil ran a model from my trim line, from my outline from around the terminus in Sinks Canyon and in North Fork, and it was obvious that ice should have been pouring across a divide between the two, but it didn't show it. It didn't show it initially, and I know ice poured across that divide because I've stood on the divide and looked at the striations. So we had to go back and forth with that a little bit, and that's the fun part, you know. In essence, you know, if you know what you're looking at, and not just depending on the model to do it all, but from your field work, if you know what you're looking at, you can really fine tune it. I think we did 2 iterations of the Middle Fork and the North Fork, and put the Little Poposia in with that as well too. And after a couple of iterations of that, I don't see any major problems at all. I think it came out, I don't know if I've told Phil this, but I think it really looked realistic to me, having been on the ground in a lot of that area. So it's fun. It's cool. But yeah,
I'm glad to hear about that because
we'll
I don't know the area at all.
Well, I've been leaving you alone so you can work, that's what
I mean,
yeah, we'll send you guys out some of those to let you see what we're working with. And if anybody sees anything we're doing wrong, please tell us, right? Yeah.
that's
Could
great.
I just say on a related note, so I have lots of outlines, but they're all on USGS quads, so they all need to be digitized. And I don't know when I would get around to doing that, but I certainly, based on field work, I probably have about 50 glaciers in Colorado mapped out with contours.
You can, in my experience, you can go from a map like that to a digitizing on Google Earth really easily. I used to make sure I knew what I was doing at Fremont Lake, even though I've been there so often, I don't remember how many times. I used Jerry Richmond's map on that one. And that's about as, and Jerry was a lot of things, but he wasn't wrong in that. You did a real good job when you compare it to the LiDAR image. When you compare it to the LiDAR image, he was spot on. And taking those around Halls Lake, up around Burnt Lake, and all of that, it was really spot on. So I used him and Murphy's map for Bull Lake as well too, and Dinwiddie, and those look good. So if you've got a map, if you've made a map, just use that 24, 24. Yeah, 1 to 24. There we go. 1 to 24 map, and you can generate a matching image almost on Google Earth that allows you to sort of transpose that very easily. At least I thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, previously with other work, what I've done is just bring the digital data into Surfer, and then I transfer there. I can digitize on Surfer. I'm not a GIS guy per se. Yeah. So I've done everything using the Surfer software. Yeah. And so that was my thought. I would do it that way. But
I find I had to use, I don't know if there's something wrong with what I'm doing, but I've ended up having to digitize on the web version of Google Earth. That is, as far as I know, that's the only version that allows you to create a KML file. Mm-hmm. And you can just digitize it with your mouse on that. You just go around and click and edit.
Yeah, Surfer also allows you to save as a same format. So,
okay. Yeah. But I haven't had to use a GIS software or anything like that for that. So and I'm a Luddite, so
yeah, I do.
I know that the emphasis is certainly on outlines. I've gotten in trouble with this before with some of my questions, but when Keith just talked about having outlines with contours, with surface contours, is there a way, even if that's not the focus, that somehow those contours could be incorporated into the database? Because I think that, at least from my perspective, would make the outlines a lot more useful, at least if we're comfortable with the contours. But when you have the surface, there are a lot of things that you can do that you can't do just with the outline.
Has anybody else used the Google Earth web version? It seems to me like there's a way it'll ask you if you want to use contours, as I recall. I think.
But these are ice surface contours, right?
Yeah. No, I think these are contours on the map, I think.
But I think what Eric's referring to are ice surface contours, not
I'm sorry,
not the bed.
Well, I think that's what you were referring to, right, Keith?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant just regular old topo contours. Sorry.
No, no.
Sorry.
Would a raster of surface elevation also be valuable? I mean, Ben, is it possible to upload that to the database, a bunch of shape files of the actual surface contours, or even a raster? Is that possible?
Yeah, the as it is right now, I think a raster would be a little bit more challenging, but there are ways to preserve those contours. Yes.
One thing I want to add is, if you have the map, interprograph map, you can always scan. If you scan that, and then they have a corner, we can do georeferencing and then put on the map and then automate the process to delineate the lines.
Yeah. I think one of the issues there, I'm just off the top of my head, is that often these glaciers extend over multiple quads. And so you'd have to scan, at least I would have to scan individual small segments and then try to link them together. And then you're gonna, that seems tedious. So again, what I would do, I mean, if I'm going to do this, I will just bring in the digital topos into Surfer, mosaic them, and then I'm off and running.
Yeah, you can do that in ArcGIS as well. So
yeah, but
if you scan photos,
that's the problem. I don't do that.
Yeah, right. But Surfer will work too. So actually, if the line is very clear, for example, you use very dark color, I think a programmably, we can automatically extract the line. You don't need to digitize again. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Well, we're past the hour here, so why don't we sign off for now? And I'll send a follow-up message with our plan to meet again in just over a month from now. And please do keep the conversations going. I think you can see the email addresses of people in the working group. That's up to date, at least the latest emails that I've sent. And yeah, we'll look forward to discussing more in April.
Sounds good.
Good.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.